they're quite the responsibility, is at least what I've been told. Because so far as I know and understand, I don't have any yet. I mean, it's a possibility. I have some nights I don't remember in countries whose names I don't care to disclose. But as it currently stands, your boy is not paying alimony. And therefore, understanding the complicated moral decisions that a parent has to go through on a day-to-day basis isn't exactly my forte. That was supposed to be a basketball shot, not a... You get it. But just because I don't have children of my own doesn't mean I can't identify what appears to be bad parenting, or just straight up lack of parenting in general. And in fact, anybody with 2 eyes and a reading comprehension level over a first grader, so according to all the teachers on TikTok, 8th graders nowadays, will be able to see that Naruto's parenting experience wasn't exactly peaches and cream. That is to say that the parenting that Naruto received at the hands of Konoha as a greater whole wasn't exactly top tier. See, Naruto was obviously orphaned on the night of his birth. Naruto quite literally speed run having parents. Now all this is because Obito knew that when Kushina was giving birth to Naruto that the seal on Kurama would be at its weakest. So Obito swooped in, killed Hiruzen's wife, unsealed Kurama, and let Kurama destroy a large part of Konoha. Because as it currently stood, Obito wasn't aware that by sealing Kurama into the Ghetto statue first, that would actually destroy the Ghetto statue. But considering the fact that Obito was like 3 months into doing what he wants, as Madara had literally just died, we can't really fault him for not knowing that information. But because Kurama was rampaging throughout the village to celebrate Naruto's birth, Minato and Kushina had to battle against Kurama to reseal him before he was able to destroy all of Konoha. And since Kurama was being controlled by Obito and Kushina was weakened after having Kurama burst out of her, I mean technically if she wasn't an Uzumaki, she would have died, the deck was kind of stacked against Minato and Kushina, which is why they ended up as a ring accessory for Kurama, though they were, however, able to seal Kurama, with half of Kurama going into Minato and being brought into the Reaper's belly, and the other half being sealed into Naruto with the 8 trigram seal. But when Naruto gained in Nine-Tailed Foxes, he lost in parents. And it was after Minato was able to seal away Kurama inside of his brand new baby boy that he looked at Hiruzen and told Hiruzen to keep an eye on his baby boy. Something that people assumed the 3rd Hokage, probably one of the strongest men in the history of Konoha, would be able to figure out, especially with his track record of taking in orphans. However, instead of Naruto being raised in the coddled arms of the 3rd Hokage being looked over with all of the resources of Konoha, as they fully understood that this child was the child of 2 war heroes and had inside of him the strongest entity on Earth, Naruto instead was thrown into a 1-bedroom apartment to live by himself in the slums of Konoha, where he was provided a roof over his head, but not food or money or education or friends or resources. And thus Naruto, who had the information that he was the Jinchuriki of the Nine-Tailed Fox leaked by Danzo so the entire village could come together in their hatred for a child, was forced to live a life of incredible solitude, with no parents, no friends, and no resources. And while, fortunately for everybody in Konoha and probably everybody on Earth, Naruto turned out to be the kind of guy who wanted to prove everybody who hated him wrong and rule them one day. This doesn't excuse how Naruto was raised. But who within Konoha is at fault for how Naruto was raised? Because while your average person might point at Hiruzen and say, oh yeah, it's undoubtedly Hiruzen's fault, we could point our finger out and do a 360 Neji rotation and find fault in all 360 degrees that we point. Basically, everybody in Konoha was responsible for the way that Naruto was raised. So the real question becomes, was the fault truly Hiruzen's, or was there other people that could have raised Naruto? And if the fault is Hiruzen's, why is it Hiruzen's fault? Well, today we hope to answer all those questions and a whole lot more, because today we're talking who should have raised Naruto. But before I get my Jerry Springer hat on and tell somebody to start paying alimony, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. If you guys like the idea of me waxing poetic about things that fictional characters did incorrectly from a moral basis, then you're gonna love my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime. And if you want to see me be about as amoral as possible, then go ahead and listen to my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Or if you want to look like somebody who weighs the moral decisions of fictional characters, then go ahead and meander on over into my merch store, otakusanonymous.net, where you can pick up some of the greatest anime t-shirts, sweatshirts, and sticker packs known to man. So today here on Jerry Springer, we're going to be discussing who is Naruto's real daddy. Now, we've taken blood from Naruto and all the possible supposed fathers today, and today we are truly finally going to answer the question, who should have raised Naruto? However, unfortunately, when it comes down to a blood test, the only people related to Naruto by blood are in the ground. I mean, Maybe. But we'll get to that in a second. See, Naruto's mistreatment as a child is one of the most profoundly confusing things in all of anime, because genuinely, it makes next to no sense. Obviously, if you really break down why Naruto was mistreated like he was, then the real canon reason that Naruto was mistreated all goes back to Danzo. As we learned in one of the Naruto light novels, that the reason that the entire village decided to hate Naruto, and the reason that the entire village knew that Naruto was the Jinchuriki of Kurama, is because Danzo went around spreading that information after Kurama attacked the village, as Danzo believed that the entire village needed a symbol to hate so they could come together in their hatred of one thing, thus reunifying the village through their hatred of a baby. But just the fact that Naruto, as the Jinchuriki of Kurama, got hate for what Kurama did never really made a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, the child who Kurama was sealed into isn't at fault for the crimes of the beast that was sealed into them against their will. Well, not really against their will, because it's not like Naruto as a one-day-year-old had a will, but Naruto had nothing to do with Kurama being sealed inside of him, and thus an entire village beefing with a child who had no control over the beast being sealed inside of them never made sense. And that's because that technically isn't Naruto's story. See, the reason that Naruto is written the way that he is in OG Naruto is because of a separate kind of story that Kishimoto wrote. See, prior to the creation of Naruto, Masashi Kishimoto, the mangaka of Naruto, created a one-shot called Naruto. And in this, Naruto's not a human. Naruto is actually a baby fox, but a baby demon fox. However, Naruto, this baby demon fox, goes about living his life as a regular young boy. However, in the village that he lives in, everybody is naturally very distrustful of Naruto, because Naruto's father, the big demon fox that made him, attacked said village a long time ago. Now, the village chief of the village that Naruto lived in was the only person who had survived that battled against Naruto's father, and thus this village chief took pity upon Naruto and allowed for him to live in his village. Now, Naruto, who was a subject of all of the villagers' ire, became very mischievous, and he learned multiple ninja techniques to continue his mischief, like transformation technique. But because all of the villagers began to hate Naruto, and because his mischief got bigger and bigger, the village chief feared that he would one day become like his father, and thus the village chief sends Naruto to grow up in a city where he hopes that Naruto will befriend humans. And the first thing that this Naruto little fox does is go to a ramen shop and get something to eat. And it's at this ramen shop that Naruto befriends a man by the name of Kuroda. And then the story kind of devolves into Naruto protecting Kuroda against people trying to murder him, and Kuroda trying to fix this old ancient symbol in the village that has apparently become crooked and faded because Kuroda's an artist. And then there's kind of like a murder whodunit, and then it gets placed on Naruto. He has to beat the charges, and so on and so forth. However, people liked this one shot that Masashi Kishimoto created, and thus a lot of the characters that we see in Naruto come from this one shot, most notably being Naruto. And since people love the idea of a baby demon fox that was related to a greater demon fox that destroyed a village, and thus everybody was distrustful of said baby fox, Kishimoto stuck with that idea, but changed it so that the main character would be a human. And thus the real reason that everybody within Konoha blames Naruto for the attacks of Kurama is because Naruto's story is based off the one shot, where instead of being the Jinchuriki of Kurama, he is the son of Kurama. And while it still doesn't necessarily make sense to blame the son for the actions of his father, because they were both technically demon foxes, the connection can be made a bit more easily. But Naruto is just a human with the demon fox inside of him. But people are still afraid in Konoha that one day that demon fox will rage out and redestroy the village. Still a ridiculous reason to hate on a child, especially when you consider the fact that just a couple of villages over, they got another child with a sand Tanuki in him who keeps letting the sand Tanuki break out because he has nobody who likes him. And therefore there's very much a precedent to keep your child's nukes as happy and satiated as possible, because once they get lonely, they get angry, and that's when the tailed beast comes out. And thus the reason that I said if you did a 360 rotation while pointing your finger out, you could find people who are at blame for Naruto's upbringing. As everybody in Konoha as a whole treats him like garbage, there are people who should have stepped in to make sure he was treated less like garbage. And the first name that a lot of people will bring up in regards to this conversation is Hiruzen, as Hiruzen was the person who told Minato that he would raise his son, and then obviously proceeded to not do that. So this raises the question, why would Hiruzen not raise Naruto? Why did Hiruzen decide that it was okay to skirt the duties that he promised Minato he would do? Is it because he simply didn't want to be a father again? Or was there something more malicious behind his intent? Or was he maybe just way too busy? See, genuinely when it comes down to it, I believe that Hiruzen is usually a fantastic scapegoat for any and all things that ever go wrong in Naruto. As well, Hiruzen was a benevolent character in OG Naruto, Shippuden made him out to be more of a villain. Well, not really a villain, just kind of incompetent, as not only was he responsible for raising Naruto and didn't raise Naruto, but he was also the first person to catch Orochimaru doing human experimentation, but wasn't able to stop him because of his connection to Orochimaru. And thus, a lot of the bad things that happen in Naruto can be tied back to Hiruzen. However, when it comes to blaming people for how Naruto was brought up, I don't point as many fingers at Hiruzen as other people do. See, I completely agree that Hiruzen should have been more involved in Naruto's upbringing, but Hiruzen is also maybe one of the busiest people to ever exist in Naruto, period. See, really until Boruto, we didn't understand just how much work being the Hokage was. As now that Boruto is out and Naruto is the Hokage, we're seeing that Naruto, somebody who loves his two children way more than Hiruzen ever loved Naruto, has next to no time to spend with them, as the paperwork, missions, and just general responsibilities of the Hokage keep you at the office for like 23 hours a day. In fact, without Naruto's massive chakra reserves and ability to use shadow clones, he probably wouldn't be able to do half the work that he does now. And that's during peacetime. Hiruzen was the Hokage during two of the bloodiest conflicts in ninja history. And while technically Naruto was born into a relative peacetime, it was only a couple of years after the conclusion of the Third Great Shinobi World War, which caused Hiruzen to step down in disgrace. Not to mention that after Hiruzen retook over the mantle of the third Hokage, he had to rebuild Konoha. And thus, not only was Hiruzen dealing with the political and financial repercussions of two back-to-back all-out ninja wars, but he was also rebuilding an entire village. And if we know anything about reconstructing Konoha, we know that it spreads out the village's resources almost hair thin. As after the Konoha Crush arc, when Orochimaru comes back to Konoha and destroys a large part of it, the only people that Konoha can muster to go and get Sasuke back are all Genin. And thus, in the next couple of years after Naruto is born, not only does Hiruzen have no resources, but also probably no time. And thus, the prospect of raising a baby while trying to remuster the strength of the strongest village on Earth, which has now been weakened by an internal attack right after an armistice was signed, where we, just as a village, beat every single other ninja village, meaning that every single other ninja village now has beef with us, but there's an armistice, so they won't attack, right? Didn't seem all that important, because if hypothetically any of these other villages decided to capitalize on Konoha's momentary weakness, there wouldn't have been a village for Naruto to be raised in the first place. Not to mention, when it comes to adopting orphans, Hiruzen unfortunately didn't have the best track record, as Orochimaru was also an orphan that Hiruzen took under his wing, and thus Orochimaru grew up basically as Hiruzen's son, with Hiruzen raising him and then eventually taking him into his Genin squad that would later become the legendary Sani. However, by the time of Naruto's birth, Orochimaru's evil curiosities had already begun to peak, as Hiruzen wanted Orochimaru to be the fourth Hokage. However, upon realizing that Orochimaru was becoming more and more evil by the day, he decided to go with Minato. And that event right there is basically what sent Orochimaru over the edge, as Orochimaru realized that Konoha had given up on him, more so relying on the golden boy, Minato, instead of him, even though he had fought in back-to-back wars with the second and third Great Shinobi World Wars for Konoha. And while Hiruzen's biological child, Konohamaru's eventual parent, who we know nothing about, was still alive, eventually they would die. Kind of like how on the night that Naruto was born, Hiruzen's wife died. And thus Hiruzen was left a widower with nobody to help him raise Naruto. And he had already gone real 0 for 1 on orphans. And just a couple of years into Naruto's life, he would lose his only biological child. Now, does the loss of his biological child lead to him raising his grandson like he's basically his child? Yeah, kind of, as Konohamaru and Hiruzen were incredibly close until Hiruzen's death. But you can't necessarily blame Hiruzen for having a closer relationship with Konohamaru than Naruto, as Konohamaru represented the last vestiges of his lineage. That's just biological. Not to mention, while Hiruzen was dealing with the reconstruction of Konoha, he was also dealing with the creation of the Akatsuki, which is almost entirely his Shadow Hokage, Danzo's fault. And thus Hiruzen had an insane amount on his plate, and almost all of it was coming from the second most powerful person in the village, Danzo. Now, does any of this excuse Hiruzen from trying harder to raise Naruto? No, as Hiruzen himself didn't have to be the one to raise Naruto. Hiruzen, as the Hokage, had complete and total control over all of Konoha's forces. He, much like how Rasa assigned Gaara's uncle to keep an eye on Gaara and be his closest friend, could have assigned a Genin or a Chunin or even possibly a Jonin to keep an eye on Naruto. Now, assigning anybody above a Genin probably wouldn't have been a possibility until Konoha was reconstructed. Once Konoha was reconstructed, Konoha definitely had the assets to keep an eye on Naruto in a way that would have been deemed appropriate, and thus Hiruzen not doing it at that point is somewhat inexcusable. One thing I'm not going to do, though, is make the excuse that Hiruzen didn't bring Naruto into his fold because of the politics of it all. That is to say that Hiruzen didn't want to be seen with Naruto because Naruto is viewed as the demon fox of Konoha. One, Hiruzen didn't even really want to be the Hokage. He literally stepped down. And two, Hiruzen could have very easily reversed the narrative of Naruto being evil whenever he wanted to. And in fact, the sheer act of Hiruzen ushering in Naruto as one of his own probably would have stopped that narrative directly in its tracks, as Konoha as a whole had an insane amount of respect for Hiruzen. The only possible counter argument argument at this point that I would hear is that if Hiruzen were to usher in Naruto as one of his own, that Danzo would have used that information against him to get him ripped from his seat as the third Hokage and take over rule of Konoha. And thus, there is technically the possibility, if we factor in Danzo and his ability to use information against Hiruzen, that if Hiruzen took direct care of Naruto, that Danzo would use it as an opportunity to take over Konoha. And it's a possibility that Hiruzen, identifying the fact that this would be a massive step back for Konoha in terms of, well, you know, being the good guys, decided that Naruto's upbringing was a necessary sacrifice. And therefore, while I'm not saying that Hiruzen is blameless in any of this, in fact, he probably holds one of the bigger slices of blame when it comes to Naruto's upbringing, shifting the entirety of the blame onto him is narrow-sighted, because there are other people who deserve just as much blame, like Jiraiya. Yes, I'm fully aware that Minato asks Hiruzen to raise Naruto. However, technically, Hiruzen isn't the person who should be raising Naruto by the letter of the law, because Naruto has a godfather, and the literal job of godfathers and godmothers is to raise a child should their parents die. It's a Roman Catholic practice, and there are really two ways to nominate people as a godfather or a godmother to a child. One is to simply ask somebody to be the godfather or godmother to your child, and the other way is to name your child after somebody else. And upon naming your child after somebody else, they are nominated as the godfather or godmother of said child. And this is exactly what happens with Naruto, except instead of naming Naruto Jiraiya, Naruto is named after a character that Jiraiya makes up. And therefore, because Naruto is named after something of Jiraiya's creation, Jiraiya becomes Naruto's godfather. And thus, since Jiraiya is Naruto's literal godfather, he's the person who should step in when Naruto's actual parents die. And thus, while Hiruzen did agree to raise Naruto, Jiraiya holds the actual moral responsibility to raise Naruto. However, Naruto doesn't see Jiraiya until he's 13, and a lot could have and probably should have gone wrong in those first 13 years. But it's not like we can't use the same arguments we used for Hiruzen for Jiraiya, as Jiraiya was also incredibly busy during those first 13 years, as it was during the tail end of the Third Great Shinobi World's War that the iteration of the Akatsuki as we knew them in Naruto and Naruto Shippuden finally came to be, and it was Jiraiya's job as both Minato and Hiruzen Shadow Hokage to keep an eye on the Akatsuki. Not to mention that on top of keeping an eye on the Akatsuki, Jiraiya has run hundreds of S-rank missions, and thus Jiraiya basically by himself was keeping Konoha together. However, because Jiraiya has run hundreds of S-rank missions, he's one of the richest men in Naruto's history. On top of that, he was an incredibly accomplished and well-published author. In fact, when it comes down to it, outside of the leaders of villages and the daimyos, Jiraiya was probably the richest person we've ever met. And thus, Jiraiya could have absolutely afforded to pay somebody to keep an eye on Naruto, or put him in better lodging, or just get somebody to make him some food every once in a while. But you can make the absolute same argument for Hiruzen, because while obviously the resources of Konoha were spread thin in the beginning of Hiruzen's second term, both Hiruzen and Jiraiya had the means to make sure that Naruto could be watched over by people less busy and less important than them. But when you consider the amount of things they had in their hands at that current time, I guess you could excuse them for forgetting about Naruto, which is why a lot of people actually point towards a third option for raising Naruto, and that third option is Kakashi. Now, when it comes to the three options of Jiraiya, Hiruzen, and Kakashi, I agree with Kakashi the least. Kakashi at the time of Minato and Kushina's death was at oldest 15, and Minato and Kushina were the fourth and fifth important people that died on Kakashi in the last 10 or so years, as Kakashi in his short life not only lost Sakamo Hatsuke, his father, but also Rin and Obito, two of which he was at least tangentially responsible for. And then after losing Rin, Minato, his former sensei, assigns Kakashi to join the Anbu so he can keep an eye on Kushina. And what's pretty much the first thing that happens to Kakashi after being assigned to keep an eye on Kushina? He's barred from going to battle against Kurama by Hiruzen, and thus Minato and Kushina die, the only important people left in Kakashi's life outside of Might Guy. And thus this 15-year-old now, in the last 10 years, has dealt with the death of the 5 most important people in his life. And it's in this moment that he casts himself into a world of endless agony and despair, joins the Root, and basically becomes a human killing machine for the next 5 years, until Hiruzen identifies his potential and yanks him out of the Root to save his life. And while you could absolutely make the argument that keeping an eye on Naruto during this time period would have made sure he never fell into that endless pit of despair, I don't think it's a super great idea to pitch a child to a newly depressed and incredibly scarred 15-year-old. And thus, while it might have been good for Kakashi to raise Naruto, it's just unlikely. So really, when it comes down to it, I don't think Hiruzen, Jiraiya, or Kakashi were good options to raise Naruto. They were all either too busy, too important, or too scarred. And really, when it comes down to it, there's one person and one person alone who had the time, the will, the experience, and the money and power to raise Naruto. And that person was Mikoto Uchiha, also known as Sasuke and Itachi's mother. See, I believe without a shadow of a doubt that Naruto's best opportunity at a somewhat normal childhood would have been with Mikoto Uchiha, barring the massacre. God, that would have been tough. God, you thought people were afraid of Naruto before. Now the narrative's gonna get passed around that everybody gets near just dies. But really, when it comes down to it, Mikoto Uchiha, who was a former Jonin, was already a mother of two. On top of this, she had a boy roughly the same age as Naruto, and was close personal friends with Kushina, and was fully aware that she was pregnant, as we're given a scene where a pregnant Kushina is talking to Mikoto, she's holding on to Sasuke, and Kushina tells Mikoto that she's going to name her child Naruto. And thus, even though nobody in the village was aware of the fact that Naruto was Minato and Kushina's child, Mikoto Uchiha was, and that she was fully aware of who Naruto was and who he was orphaned from. And yet, Mikoto Uchiha never adopts Naruto, even though she has the time, the power, the money, and maybe the ability. Because here's the thing, while Hiruzen, Jiraiya, and Kakashi are either too scarred, too important, or too busy to adopt Naruto, Mikoto Uchiha is just a housewife. But she's the housewife of inarguably the third most important and most powerful person in all of Konoha after Minato's death. Thus, she has the resources and the time and maybe the influence to adopt Naruto and make sure that he isn't treated the way that he is in the regular timeline. On top of this, assuming that if Mikoto Uchiha was to adopt Naruto, and if Danzo still disseminated the information that Naruto was Kurama's Jinchuriki, while Naruto would be ostracized, he would also be living within a clan that is currently being ostracized, so the people around him would be able to understand his plight. And thus, living amongst the Uchiha probably would have been the best possible scenario for Naruto, as they understood what it felt like to be glared at hatefully as it pertains to an attack by Kurama. But unfortunately, this could never happen, as it was already widely believed, and for pretty good reason, mind you, that the Uchihas were the one who released Kurama. I mean, Kurama was rampaging around the village with Sharingans in his eyes. It's not crazy for the village to assume that the Uchiha were somewhat responsible for that, and therefore giving Kurama to the Uchiha when they were the ones under suspicion of using him in the first place would have been kind of crazy. And thus, even if Hiruzen did want to put Naruto under the care of Mikoto Uchiha, Danzo and the Council of Elders never would have let it happen. Thus, while it is a possibility that Mikoto Uchiha did want to raise Naruto, it simply couldn't have happened within Konoha. So in all of this, just like with the Kurama attack, she and every other Uchiha is blameless. She is undoubtedly the best option when it comes to raising Naruto. And I would have loved to see what the timeline would have looked like if Naruto were raised by the Uchiha. And I know I haven't done what ifs in a while, but maybe I'll make that the first one I do in a long time. But these aren't the only possible people who could have raised Naruto, as there are more or less talked about people that could have stepped up, like the members of Minato's Hokage Guard platoon, also known as Raido, Genma, and Iwashi. You know, toothpick guy, scar guy, and then even less relevant guy. The three that hold hands and use flying Raijin. All three of these Jonin, tasked with protecting Minato, were older than Kakashi, and since it was up to them to protect the Hokage, which they very clearly didn't, the moral responsibility for protecting the child of the Hokage kind of shifted to them. And thus, if you're gonna make the argument that Kakashi could have stepped up to raise Naruto as a 15-year-old, why not make the argument that Genma or Raido or Iwashi, who were 18 when Minato died, could have stepped up to raise Naruto? It's not like they were Anbu members, they're Jonin, who are mostly walking around the walls. They absolutely had time to pop in and keep an eye on Naruto. At the very least, they didn't have to be the ones to take the moral responsibility of raising Naruto, but if anybody should have been assigned to keep an eye on Naruto by the likes of Hiruzen or maybe even Jiraiya, it should have been these three. Now, obviously, after Minato's death, they were refocused on protecting Hiruzen, but Hiruzen's guards are way less busy than Hiruzen, especially when you consider the fact that they're almost never seen protecting Hiruzen. In fact, they're not even really seen being the Hokage protection platoon until Tsunade becomes Hokage, and that's 12 years into Naruto's life. So you could assign equal blame to them for either not standing up or not being assigned to protecting Naruto. But really, when it comes down to it, I believe the least talked about people who could have stepped up to raise Naruto are the Namikaze.
But Nick, what do you mean? We've never met the Namikaze.
You're right, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. See, obviously, the Uzumaki at this point couldn't step up to raise Naruto because they were all dead, but there was no Namikaze massacre, and it's never been confirmed that Minato was an orphan, and thus it's not crazy for us to assume that Minato had parents. Now, these parents could have died during Kurama's attack against Konoha, or these parents could just not be from Konoha, or Minato could be an orphan. However, if any semblance of the Namikaze clan existed, they would have known that Minato was the Hokage, and they would have known that Minato was expecting a child. And just like how Konohamaru was raised by the Sarutobi clan once his parents died, Naruto could have been raised by the Namikaze clan. Now, there is technically the theory that I subscribe to that the Namikaze clan doesn't actually exist, and Namikaze is just one of the names that the Senju became, as I believe that Minato was actually a cousin of Tsunade. I subscribe to the theory that Minato actually hails from Tobirama's lineage, which explains why him and Tsunade look alike. However, if Namikaze is just one of the names that the Senju took on to break down the Senju clan and just make them all members of Konoha, then unfortunately there isn't much of a Namikaze clan to raise Naruto. But unfortunately, because we know next to nothing about the Namikaze, we can't really say. So does it fall into the laps of a non-existent clan to raise Naruto? Who knows? But maybe you guys know. Who do you believe bears the burden of responsibility for raising Naruto, and why? Tell me in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. The Uchiha would have used Naruto, right? Like, I think we can all agree that Danzo and the elders actually might have been right about that. Like, they're planning the coup. They're like, yeah, we'll rile up Naruto, get him to destroy the village, and then we'll take control of Kurama, or at least, like, we'll have Kurama break out of Naruto. Like, one could argue, like, oh, Mikoto wouldn't do that to her son, but, like, Fugaku wanted pretty badly to destroy half of the village in order to make the Uchiha the ruling class, and that was going to cause a lot of death. I'm assuming that Fugaku wouldn't have been, like, super stoked on the prospect of a third son. Like, they would have used Naruto, right?